Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in Salesforce Epics Hour. Today we are going to talk about how to streamline Salesforce end-to-end UI testing with the UTAM. So we have a great speaker, Stefano and Sebastian with us. So let me hand over them for the introduction and the presentation.
Thank you so much for having us today again. So today we want to discuss actually UTAM. So quick introduction who we are. So my name is Christopher Ram. I'm a Salesforce CTA. I'm a Salesforce MVP. And I'm working at Capgemini. I'm responsible there for our enterprise customers, especially in the area of automotive, manufacturing. That are the main areas where I'm working. Sebastiano?
Yeah, Sebastiano Schwarz, my name. Happy to join you for another session here. I actually have a classic software engineering background. So before I started with Salesforce about 6 years ago, I did a lot of web development, mobile apps, also including test automation. So yeah, especially therefore happy to talk about UTAM today, as it's also in Salesforce test automation is always an ongoing topic for our enterprise clients.
Perfect. So what you can expect actually from today. So first of all, we want to set a little bit like the foundation in terms of like why is actually UTAM needed, or in particular in the first place, and end-to-end testing. Then we're diving more deeper into the topic. And of course, we wouldn't be part of like an Apex Hour session if we wouldn't have a demo. So of course, we would like to showcase how you can actually leverage it on your daily basis. And then we want to take it further, like how can you actually, what you saw, basically apply into your projects, into your DevOps lifecycle. First of all, and now let's start diving into the topic, is like, if you're following up like the discussions, potentially watch your LinkedIn feed, all the kind of announcements, you could get the impression that testing is basically not really needed anymore, because like you have like Gen AI anyways, and Gen AI is taking care for you. You hear all the stories in terms of like from various different companies with like their public announcements. We are creating, and now you can using kind of different variables, 40, 60, 80, 90, 95% of our code is generated with the aid of Gen AI. And obviously with that in mind, you can think about, is then testing really necessary, because everything is generated already like with the aid of an LLM and all the respective tools. But keeping that in mind is like, there's a very important aspect is like, first of all, it's not a guarantee for a good user experience. Obviously you need to think about regression testing, and obviously you need to think about like all the kind of very high dynamic content you potentially have, and you want to test their specific stuff. So you need to think about your safety net, and your safety net is basically your testing strategy. So when we are talking about testing strategy in the terms of Salesforce, and this is a very important aspect for me, because it's like always a little bit overlooked, and maybe like a little bit with the wrong focus from the kind of an holistic software development or life cycle in general. Most likely you will just focusing on, hey, okay, we need to get the unit tests done, the famous 75%. This is like the only thing we would like to achieve. We have like some kind of reliability in terms of our Apex testing code, and that's basically it. But see, in the first place, unit tests, and this is really like the baseline also as your kind of deployment gateway, your first wall in terms of like preventing potentially regression. So this is a very important aspect. Secondly, and on top of that, we are talking about acceptance, integration, component testing. So it's more over like we're testing already not like a specific piece of like a component. We are more over like looking at like as such, and it's maybe like first part where you can think about E2E, where we have like the broader part and bits and pieces of our application would like to test. And this is really like the bread and butter business you need to think of your testing strategy. Here you need to be very precise. You need to have like dedicated idea how you want to achieve that. And when we later on discussing and diving deeper more into UTAM, this is like then kind of on top of your pyramid, where we also discussing like how we can add like additional GUI testing for ensuring that our application is working as we would like to, and why we should do that. First of all, there's a lot of consistency which is potentially needed. Thinking of, for example, like a CPQ solution you would create or you're currently working on, where you have like potentially hundreds, maybe even thousands of different kind of test cases, where you want to have like test different bundles, different structures, different paths in terms of like how you want to guide your users through that kind of process. It's really hard for a human being to do all that kind of repetitive testings just based on a kind of a testing catalog. So you want to have like some kind of automation on a UI layer to ensure consistency in your testing results. Obviously, it comes across with like, or alongside with efficiency. So meaning like executing those kind of test cases, you want to have like also them as simultaneously as possible, covering potentially as much as use cases as possible, and even like working on those kind of various different edge cases where you really ensure that the power, for example, for this CPQ solution, and taking this just as one of those examples, you validating all that kind of potentially edge cases as well. And obviously it ensures also you just have like the right necessity of speed, or you're just faster in terms of like helping your business to adapt like through Salesforce updates more frequently, especially keeping all the kind of new releases from Salesforce in mind, which are almost kind of decoupled already, especially in terms of Agentforce from the classic release cycle you see. So as part of your testing strategy, what's really important is like testing iteratively and frequently. This is like the first very important part. So ensure that you have like the right level and the right number and frequency how you're actually testing. And obviously you need to think of the automation part as well. So really tailor your testing strategy alongside then your whole life cycle. And later on, we dive a little bit deeper into how you're structuring it from a testing perspective. Keeping also in mind, and this is now almost like I'm trying to revoke what I said before, test what is actually necessary, and not every kind of change requires a dedicated test or like a whole bunch of different kind of tests you actually went through. So what I'm trying to express is like starting to map out as part of your business processes what kind of capabilities, functions you deliver need or have like what kind of risk is associated to that kind of capability. Taking an example, if you have like a kind of very tiny capability which is just needed just by a portion of users in some circumstances, so kind of almost covering edge cases, it's totally okay from a testing strategy perspective if you don't spend the same amount of effort compared to like the critical part of your application, maybe stick to the CPQ, where maybe thousands of users working almost on a daily basis with that part of the application. So try to understand there's like a lot of deviation here, and start to map out different kind of risk levels related to your application. And keeping in mind, there are also non-functional requirements related to your application as well. So maybe I'm overstretching it already with like the CPQ, but potentially your CPQ solution doesn't really need to be working on your mobile devices. Maybe nobody really asked for it. Maybe you clarified with business this is like too over complex to use. So don't start trying to invent requirements potentially business has, and inventing or spending time on testings and testing strategies for parts of the application which are not really necessary and needed. So just trying here to emphasize is that also your NFRs have an implication on your whole testing strategy. So with that said, we have like the theoretically foundation in terms of what we're trying to achieve in terms of our testing strategy. We try to provide you an overview in terms of like what are the kind of focus areas. And now keeping in mind that Salesforce comes with a very dynamic, fast changing UI. And by the way, this is still great that we can, independently of our roles, going into the setup, modifying the layout, adjusting things very simply. But on the other hand, that causes some kind of headaches, obviously, to keeping our tests stable and up to date. Of course, now we can jump in and argue, and maybe coming back to the Gen AI topic I meant earlier before, there are potentially various different new providers of tools, capabilities, starting obviously from the big ones like OpenAI, Anthropic, but also if you going down into the market and seeing like a lot of different kind of vendors which are providing now capabilities which helps you to generate potentially, or you can utilize their technologies also for kind of testing capabilities. You still need to think about how you can actually leverage that, and yeah, is that really sustainable and stable so that you can use them, or are they kind of different technologies you can rely on? And obviously one of them is UTAM, and I'd like to hand over to Sebastiano to give you a little bit like, in the first place, an overview how UTAM can help you in terms of like the E2E testing capabilities.
Yeah, happy to take over. So, yeah, first of all, maybe to reiterate on what you just said, right? So, the most challenging part also for me when I started with like working on test automations in Salesforce is like the dynamic flavor of the Salesforce UI, because with all of the release updates, the platform evolving, it's in comparison to like classic web development, tricky to get like specific identifiers to target to when we want to automate certain user interactions as part of our end-to-end tests. So in a normal web application outside Salesforce ecosystem, I would include some test data IDs or like some reliable static identifiers that remain stable as part of my UI implementation. But obviously in Salesforce, except the fact that we build something custom with LWCs maybe, with all these standard UI elements, quick actions, tabs, our app launcher, and so on, we have elements that are likely to change over time. Therefore, we would always have the necessity to adapt our UI implementation. But yeah, luckily Salesforce a few years ago came up with UTAM, which is not that known kind of a solution, I would say. But yeah, probably something worth looking at when you're thinking about introducing test automation in your Salesforce implementation. And what UTAM is, first of all, the so-called UI test automation model is not a standalone test framework itself. It's more like think of it like an add-on or an additional abstraction layer that is put on top of your existing test framework that you might use. So it's technically an implementation of the page object design pattern. What this means in detail, we will look at in a second. But it provides an abstraction that sits between your tests interacting with the browser directly, and there UTAM sits in between to provide you with some reliable identifiers so that you can always reach the UI elements you're looking for. And yeah, as just mentioned, it works together with existing testing frameworks. So no matter if you have your tests with Selenium written in Java, or you have JavaScript-based tests running with WebDriver IO, for instance, this plays hand in hand. And the cool thing about UTAM is with the page objects we'll talk about in a second, Salesforce, for all their standard UI elements, like the ones I already mentioned beforehand, like quick actions, list views, and all that stuff, they provide a library that they maintain up to date with every new release. So means if you like continuously just update this library, ideally your test implementation should remain stable. of course, if you have certain custom UI elements built as part of your solution with LWCs, you would be in charge of maintaining these parts, of course, but for everything that comes out of the box with the Salesforce UI, they got you covered. And yeah, with that said, maybe just jumping to a bit more details regarding the page object design pattern that UTAM leverages to achieve this simplification of writing your UI tests. So what you see right now is probably what you're used to when you're thinking about writing tests or doing test automation. So you have some sort of test runner, may it be Selenium, may it be WebDriver, may it be something else. And your test code will somewhere include the respective selectors, identifiers for the UI elements that you want to click or interact with as part of your automated test. And this will then control the respective browser interactions and can help you testing the respective page. As mentioned, with Salesforce, you have the challenge that there is not always like a specific identifier that is remaining stable or is always identifiable in the same way, which makes your test like either flaky or making them break at all overall. And therefore, UTAM comes into play and provides an additional abstraction. And this additional abstraction is something that sits between your test runner or your test code and the browser or the browser page you're currently trying to test. And instead of targeting specific CSS selectors or something directly in your test code, instead you will reference these so-called page objects. And a page object in the end is just a JSON-based representation of a given UI element that Salesforce provides you with. Or you can, of course, also generate your own page objects for your own custom UI implementations. And these, in the end, are compiled in the programming language of your choice, depending on like how you write your test automation. As mentioned earlier, it is compatible with Java as well as JavaScript. And that way you can make sure that if you write your tests without like targeting some identifiers that are subject to change, but instead rather point to these JSON page objects and keeping the aforementioned library up to date, your tests ideally should remain stable. But of course, this was a lot of theory, and we promised at the beginning that we also want to bring a demo. So I would suggest I would steal the screen. Christopher, I think you need to quickly stop sharing so I can take it over. And so here we go. What you should see is Visual Studio Code and one very simple test that I will guide you through in a second, or will also show you how you can even write that. But before we start with this, when you look on the left-hand side, you should see something that is more or less familiar to you if you worked with Salesforce and SFDX projects. So the structure is essentially the same, except few additional files that handle the configuration for UTAM. Maybe just up front, potentially you already see it from the test code. I decided to go with the JavaScript-based implementation using WebDriver IO to write my tests with UTAM today. So like what you need to include in order to achieve that are a few dependencies and config files. I won't go through all of them in detail in this session, but we also made sure that we provide you with some resources at the end. There are a lot of good references and sample repositories also provided by Salesforce that provide you with these kind of things, so we don't need to like go through all of them in detail. In a nutshell, there are two important config files. One is the UTAM config, which essentially just like covers the configuration for UTAM as a solution itself, like pointing to where you store your page objects or where your tests are located. And then you also have the WebDriver configuration, which includes some additional setup things in regards to like which browser should be used. In this case, I used Chrome, but you can also go for Firefox, of course. And also additional things can be configured, like for instance, how you want to execute your tests, right? So during development of the tests, maybe you would like to run them again and again after you made changes, and also visually see if the respective UI elements that you expect to are clicked accordingly. But maybe if you want to include it as part of your CI/CD solution or some other automation, then you might want to run them headlessly, for instance. So with this configuration, you could also make sure that the UI is not like visually popping up, but that the tests are executed headlessly without that. And yeah, these are the things that you can configure at this end. And of course, you also need to have the respective packages. In your Java implementation, you would have the respective Maven repositories. With our approach here, we have the respective node modules that reflect the dependencies that we need. So there are a couple of WebDriver IO related packages that would need to be included, as well as UTAM itself as the framework that we want to use, and also the Salesforce page objects library, which I mentioned beforehand, which includes always the latest page objects that you want to use in your test automations. And also there, if you look at the respective library, there's also always the reference to which Salesforce release the current Salesforce page objects version is reflecting. And you can also check in the respective versions, like which version of the library is reflecting each of the different releases in the end. But with that said, that should be enough or sufficient for the setup side of things. Let's maybe look at how we can actually build a test. And for quickly demoing it in a like timely manner, I thought let's build a very simple test that just uses Salesforce standard UI elements and navigates to a service app within our org. So for that, I already connected beforehand to a Trailhead Playground. And all we want to achieve is, if we go to this Trailhead Playground, that we click the app launcher in the top left corner. We simply search for the service app, and then in the end click on it. So meaning like navigating to the service app in the end. So the first thing before you can write your test that you would actually also need to write your test is you need a browser extension that helps you identifying the respective page objects. So this is currently only available for Chrome, but there's a UTAM browser extension you can install, which you will find on the official UTAM website. This is also linked as part of the resources we provide you with in the end. But here you can simply go to Tools, and then you will be directly prompted with the download button for installing this browser extension. And the second part that you would need, as I mentioned, the library for these page objects, for the standard UI elements, is continuously evolving and updating. So what you need as well is, and you can see it if you spin up what we want to use later on for writing the tests. So if you have the browser extensions installed, what you should see in your developer tools in Chrome is an additional tab called UTAM. And this, at the beginning, if you navigate to any kind of page, it will tell you that at this page, it finds a given amount of page objects that could be used in your test. And if we click Find, then it will show you a given set of page objects and also their respective methods in the end that you could interact with on this page. But in order to get here, the first thing, and I in this case already did this, is you need to install the latest version of the page objects library here, so that also your browser is aware of like which page objects it needs to look for. And also similarly to the browser extension itself, if you like on the exact same page, just scroll down a bit, you can download the respective page objects artifact, and you can simply import it in your browser extension. So as mentioned, what we want to achieve is like a plain simple test that automates navigating to the service app in any kind of an org. So in order to do that, of course, we are somewhere in our org, potentially in the homepage, and we somehow want to like target the app launcher to navigate to a different app. So we can simply leverage the desktop layout container here. You see also some visual highlighting that shows you like what kind of elements you are currently targeting. And then this is made up in kind of a tree structure. So you can always like navigate through the tree to get more and more in detail to the respective UI elements you want to target. So if we go down here, you see the next element would be the whole app navigation bar at the top. And if we look further down, then we see, okay, here's already what we're looking for, like the app launcher header icon that we can click on, or we can also go for the app name to maybe also later on check if we really navigated to the respective correct app we were looking for. Or you can, of course, also somehow interact with the app navigation bar to click to a different tab for the respective objects, of course. But in our case, we want to go for the app launcher here, and then we can get the button to click and can also perform or include the click action. And if you pay attention to the right-hand side of the screen, you see, okay, the browser extension already provides me with the respective test code that I would need to simply paste into my test file to reflect this kind of an interaction with the UI element we just looked for. And of course, you can also just switch between Java and JavaScript here. Won't do this now. As mentioned before, I'm going for JavaScript for this demo. So you could simply copy paste that. And I go back to my already prepared test, and I simply, just as a reference, copy it right in here, just as a reference, and you compare it to what is written above, then this should look pretty similar, except the fact that I just like change the variable names to something a bit more meaningful to actually like see what they are referencing in the end. But besides that, it's like one-to-one copied the code from the browser extension. So this way you can simply go through for your full to be tested scenario, let's say, and look for the test code that you need. Just to like give another example to also see like how this the available objects here also change. Of course, if we like completed clicking on the app launcher will most likely be opened. And now there's like an additional UI element, so to say, that we would like to click on. So you can also just simply refresh the available page objects here. And you see, also the app launcher menu was provided now as an option that is available to us. And if we go through that, then there are also different methods to check for the respective recently navigated apps, but also the search bar, for instance. And we can also get the input field, could copy again the code for that and interact with the input field to like write the text, for instance, for our service app that we want to navigate to. If you do that for all the different steps that you want to perform as part of your testing scenario, we'll simply remove what I just pasted in here as a reference. Then in the end, you come up with such a test. And you can also see what I also showed at the beginning. In the end, you can just simply verify what you want to test. In this case, that I correctly navigated to the service app of my org by simply getting the app name of the app I'm currently in, and just to verify that the test also works as expected. The only part that is maybe now worth mentioning that is a bit tricky, of course, it's not only copy-paste work in the end, because what I did up front and now not yet talked about is the way how you come up with the imports here at the top. Because this is a part that is a bit annoying because those are not resolved automatically because this is not available yet. So you need to come up with these imports on your own. And maybe just like to highlight how you can guess what kind of imports you might need for the respective page objects. if you look at the browser extension, it always gives you a reference at the beginning with like stating global or navix for navigation elements. And that way you could theoretically go manually somewhere down your whole node modules path, go to besides all the other libraries that you might have installed, go to the Salesforce page objects, and then check for the respective element. Let's say I'm searching for the app launcher menu. It sits in the global folder. Then we simply go in here, can check for the page objects, and then here you go, you will find the respective page object. This is of course a bit cumbersome, and maybe to get around this, the easiest way, or at least the part that I've found the most convenient way, if we can call it like that, to get to the import is simply like searching for it globally, and that way it will also come up in the search here, searching your node modules as well. And then you can simply right click, copy the path to the respective page object, and then use that for the import. This is at least more or less a convenient way to not search for all of this manually. But this is really like the only drawback when writing these tests, that there is no automatic resolution of the imports. So if we now have written our test, last but not least, we also want to see whether it works or not. For that, there are some small scripts that I also, like, to be honest, took over from pre-built repositories from Salesforce. So in our case, there are three test scripts that are pre-built. There's one for running the all available tests with WebDriver.io based on our configuration. Then there is one command which we don't need right now, but you will potentially need in your project to compile like your customly built page objects. And there is one script for generating the login URL, which essentially extracts the authentication details for your currently connected org in an end file. And then as part of your test, you can use the login ID and session key extracted from that to authenticate and run the tests against the respective org. So if we do that, then we would first, of course, go for the login part, and this like so. Just increase this a bit, which should ideally provide us with the just mentioned end file containing your authentication details. And then afterwards, we should be able to run our tests, or our one test in this case, which will execute all the necessary steps, interact with the Chrome browser in the background, and ideally should prompt us in a second with the successful result. And hey, it worked out smoothly. We see our test that we have included is running successfully. Also, the amount of time that it took. You can, of course, also build a lot of more spec files, include more tests as part of one of these spec files. But just for demonstrating it here, we just included this one sample test. And of course, now you would need to trust me that it actually interacts with the UI the way I just explained it. But of course, you could also go in the WebDriver.io config and simply uncomment the headless mode here to really see the browser being spinned up and having a visualization of the interaction there. It will be quite quick, so hopefully the screen share will cover it. But as you can see, it actually logs in. It actually types in the service part, and you're again prompted with the same result in the end with your test passing. Of course, if you have more complex business processes in the end, the execution takes a bit longer, but as it's like technically interacting with the browser, it's of course way faster as in like actual user clicking on all the different UI elements. Yeah, and I would say that's more or less it for the demo part. So Christopher, if you don't mind taking back the screen share to spin up the slides again, then I can continue from there.
you should be able to see it again, right?
Yep. Okay, cool. So we just demoed or talked about the execution of these tests or how to write them, but we did not yet talk about like where do these tests even make sense in your application lifecycle. So what you see here on the slide is, I would say, a typical best practice Salesforce org setup. So we have some sort of development sandbox at the start, or even multiple ones. Maybe you even work with Scratch orgs. Then we have some sort of integration environment to bring everything together, some QA instance, a UAT/staging environment, and your production org, of course. And there are, of course, different scenarios where you could include these kind of end-to-end UI tests. So maybe on an integration sandbox, you want to include them because you want to make sure if like different teams bring together changes from their respective areas, that still your critical business processes remain stable and up and running, even if we like continue to grow our platform to deliver new features. Maybe you would also want to reflect with these end-to-end UI tests some sort of regression tests that run automatically on a QA environment, so that you don't always have the manual test efforts that keep you busy repetitively. Like every sprint, you want to maybe test your most critical business processes. Or also, you can include them as part of a staging environment in the end before releasing changes to production, right? So just to make sure that everything is still running smoothly before you release your newest implementation updates to your live system. And the way you can include this, of course, would also probably not mean that you would execute these tests manually, but rather that you somehow incorporate them as part of your CI/CD solution that you have in place and your DevOps strategy overall. So here are just some sample screenshots from including it with a CI/CD solution based on GitHub Actions, but you can also like include it in whatever kind of solution you have in place. Maybe you're also working with with some partner solutions there, or you have a solution running in with Bamboo and Bitbucket. But you can leverage the same scripts that I just briefly showed and talked about to be included as part of your CI/CD solution to, at the point in time where you think it's appropriate, execute these tests automatically and make sure that your implementation is still healthy and stable. Or maybe even running them on a scheduled basis. Maybe you want to have like a weekly, nightly running job that, besides all the development work, also runs them and gives you a report or prompts you with the result, so that you on a continuous basis see if your whole implementation is still healthy. With that said, maybe to conclude with one very, very important aspect. Of course, writing these tests and also maintaining them, even if you have maybe some additional helper like UTAM, is of course something that causes effort, right? So really think about, Christopher also mentioned at the beginning, what are the scenarios, the use cases that are worth testing, especially with these complex kind of end-to-end tests. So our suggestion would be, like as a rule of thumb, go for the about 10% of your most critical business processes, your most critical use cases, to cover these with these kind of automated tests, because you need to make sure that these are always up and running and you have no downtime on these, but like not go and cover every single user story, use case, whatever in your Salesforce implementation with these kind of complex end-to-end tests, because this would also cause an overhead at a given point in time with your implementation growing over years. So Christopher, I'm not sure if you have something to add from your end.
Maybe just to add, you already teased it. If you're interested in all the kind of resources around UTAM, we just put everything into like a dedicated post, so you can access it with the aid of the QR code. Just maybe pause the video, take your phone, and then going with that, and with saying that, thank you again for having us, for watching the session until the end. Hopefully you get a kind of a better impression in terms of like how you can bring your implementation in terms of the testing, in terms of an end-to-end testing with the aid of UTAM to the next level. and we're really looking forward for your feedback. So please feel free, reach out to us in the comments via LinkedIn. So we're always happy to take your thoughts, and yeah, really keen and looking forward for your feedback. And then yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for a great session.